Way back in the spring of 1990, 10-year-old me was given a $5 allowance. In search of something to spend my money on, I came upon something fantastic at my local convenience store newsstand. It was then that I started a lifelong obsession with the gold standard of sequential art, the comic book. Now, as an old man, I have decided to open up some old boxes and dig into my comic book collection. I decided it's time for me to review and analyze the illustrations and artists that made me comics crazy. What's good, comic book fans? This is Chris Crazy House, and I am back again for another episode of Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy. And we are continuing our look in our review of the Return of the Sinister Six, and we are now on part 5. This is the big one, folks. This is the climax of the story, and this is where we actually get to see Spider-Man fight the Sinister Six. And unlike their very first appearance way back when the Sinister Six appeared in an Amazing Spider-Man annual, he had to fight them one at a time, but in this one, he has to fight them all at once. So, we got the Battle Royale, and what we have here on the cover is my favorite cover of the Return of the Sinister Six. You got Spider-Man fighting all of his enemies at once, and I just love this cover. This cover was everything to me when I first saw it way back in 1990 as a 10-year-old when I started collecting comic books. This is exactly what I wanted from a comic book. You get to see the hero fighting his darndest and trying his best to survive against all these villains set up against him. Just very well done. And since then, this has become a classic comic book cover. If you even look here on the collected version, they use that cover for the cover of the graphic novel. Okay, so the graphic novel of The Return of the Sinister Six actually has this classic cover, which was drawn by Erik Larsen and inked by Al Gordon. Okay, so we're going to be taking a look at this story, and we're going to be looking at the original copy from 1990 that I bought right off the newsstand. I remember buying this one from 7-Eleven. And we're going to be looking at the collected version here that I have, the graphic novel version as well, so we can see the difference in the colors and the finished artwork. So let's get right to it, flip right to the inside, and see what we got here for the splash page of this issue. And we got the actual Sinister Six are actually looking in on the space shuttle that they're going to hijack so that they can launch this deadly poison into the atmosphere. But what you have on the outside is kind of like a figurative look as to what's going to happen in this comic. Okay, this is not literally, but more figuratively. So this would actually be like a fun poster to have if you ever got a hold of a poster, or if you ever could find the actual original page of the Sinister Six kind of around there, and Spider-Man with his spider senses going off in shock that all these enemies are coming at him at once. And of course, the name of the story is Death from Above. So, something I wanted to get into here before we even get into the actual story part is something you're going to notice in this book and in the books that follow it. So, Erik Larsen was actually flirting with the idea of having Spider-Man's outfit being red and black. I don't know if he did it just for a time-saving thing or what, but you'll notice that his costume, the parts that are supposed to be blue, are actually getting colored in black. And they leave out the highlights. The highlights only show up in certain pages. But if you go to the story arc that comes after the Return of the Sinister Six, which is called Powerless, I think the first 3 or 4 issues of that actually have Spider-Man in a red and black costume. So this is way before Miles Morales. They flirted with the idea of having Spider-Man in red and black, but eventually editors went back to making sure that you can actually see the blue highlights within his costume. So just something to keep a lookout for as we go forward. But as we get to the story, we got Dr. Octopus. They're actually underwater and like a little underwater mechanized base here. And this is kind of like their scope that they're using to view the rocket that they're spying on. And we see some of the things, some of the camaraderie of the Sinister Six is already unraveling, because Sandman, I explained to you before that at this point, Sandman was actually trying to go straight and not be a criminal anymore. But, you know, he's a little unsure about this plan because he's worried about all these people getting killed. And all, you know, if the poison or the people don't give up the ransom, this Dr. Octopus is going to wind up poisoning everybody in the planet. And he's getting a little scared here. And even Electro is wondering, he's like, you know what? The whiner is starting to worry me, Doc. We got to figure out what are we going to do with him if he doesn't want to go along with the plans. And Dr. Octopus is, you know, just giving Electro some assurances, saying, you know, I got something for Sandman if he acts up. If he breaks bad on us, I got something special just for him. So that's some foreshadowing as to what's going to happen in this story. So you got Spider-Man, he's swinging around here, swinging around the actual rocket himself. Unbeknownst to him, the Sinister Six are actually watching the rocket from underwater. But he's taking a look at it himself because Peter Parker is going to be, he's supposed to be there taking pictures for not only the university, but also for the Daily Bugle, because he feels like this is going to be an important scientific launch that's going to happen here in New York. So very good poses here for Spider-Man. You get to see him kind of crouched here in the dark and then kind of spinning away on his web in kind of a straightaway. And this is something that, for artists who do comic books, something to keep an eye on. You see how his body is positioned, and they give him some blank space to make sure that those word bubbles can go there, or these thought balloons can go in there. That's very important. This is something you have to really keep in mind when you're drawing your panels for your comics, to always leave enough space for your actual word bubbles and word balloons. So make sure when you design your artwork, there's always space for that. Don't try to just fill the panel completely. Think about where these word balloons and thought balloons are going to go, or captions. So what Peter is worried about at this time as well is that, you know, Aunt May is still grieving the loss of her boyfriend Nathan, and Spider-Man just coming over just to check on her and see how she's doing. And, you know, he kind of hitches a ride on a truck to get back to Queens, and then he's kind of looking around the corner at Aunt May while she's kind of sitting there sulking, drinking some tea, and still feeling bad about this. And Spider-Man is just wondering the fact that he's a hero, but there's nothing he can do to actually make Aunt May feel better in this situation. Now, they actually have a very interesting conversation here where Aunt May admits that she loved Nathan, but she's actually somewhat happy that he passed away. And the fact is, because Nathan had a terminal heart condition, he was actually in a lot of pain, and she's glad that he's not suffering anymore. And sometimes we do feel that about certain relatives. If we have a relative that's suffering from a terminal illness, or that they went through a really bad illness and they're suffering through it, sometimes we're almost relieved when it's over. So this is something very interesting to put into a comic book. This is not something that I thought about as a child, obviously, but now as an adult, I can look back on something like this and appreciate it more now that I have had both friends and relatives who have passed away over the years. I can say that I understand where that relief comes from when your family member is not suffering anymore, or your friend is not suffering anymore from whatever was ailing them. So I get that totally. We cut over here to Peter walking down the street, and all of a sudden, you know, luckily he has spider senses, but someone actually tried to drop a brick on his head, and he actually goes around the corner and climbs up with his spider powers to figure out what was going on, and he sees that someone was actually trying to kill him. And this leads more into the story with Mary Jane, because we have some people out here who are so obsessed with Mary Jane that they even want to kill her husband, Peter Parker. And we got, I guess you can consider this a cheesecake type pose here, but really it's just Mary Jane getting her workout. But, you know, she's sitting down on the ground doing the splits and stretching, keeping herself in shape. And even the Fantastic Four are talking about the new research that's going on at the university with the ley line. So they kind of got some more ways to kind of tie in this story. And, you know, Peter comes in through the skylight, as he always does, to their apartment. And he's worried about, you know, the fact that, you know, he can protect himself. So it's not so much worried about him, but he's still worried about his wife, that someone is so obsessed with her that they would try to kill him or maybe do harm to someone else around him. So luckily his spider senses saved him, but that's not going to help everybody. And Mary Jane is actually very upset about this because she's feeling like it's her fault that these crazy people are trying to hurt her husband, and she doesn't go for that at all. So she's not your typical damsel in distress where she needs someone to come save her. She actually wants to protect her husband, and I kind of like that. And I really like this panel here. It's very much like a fashion panel, something you would see in like a fashion magazine, you know, with a female's face here and the hair kind of, you know, flowing out. But it's very well done. This is not something you would normally see in these types of action comics, but I think they did a good job. Actually, I think her hair changes lengths a few times, but, you know, it's a comic book. The same way Batman's cape can change lengths, Mary Jane's hair can change lengths as well. Like I said, it works in the imaginary comic book world. Back in New Jersey, the Sinister Six are, you know, most of them are kind of just training and getting stuff ready for their attack the next day. And Dr. Octopus is actually sitting here getting the poison ready so he can upload that to the space shuttle. And Hobgoblin kind of flies by, and Dr. Octopus is warning him to kind of stay back because this poison is actually deadly. He doesn't want to actually spill it inside and mess up, wind up getting all these other guys sick before they can even launch their plan. But Hobgoblin decides to take a little piece of it for himself, and he actually stashes some in his bag. So this is something we need to keep an eye on because this is something that's going to come up later on in the story. Very important part to keep an eye on. So the Sinister Six, that's the thing about villains working together. They all do little shady things behind each other's back, and that's usually why they never actually win anything, because they're always too busy backstabbing and conniving behind each other's back and doing something for themselves. Going here, Spider-Man is getting ready to go over to check out the launch, and Mary Jane says she's going to go to rehearsals for her soap opera. But what she decides to do is she's not, you know, going to rehearsal. She's going downtown to the gun store. She's getting herself some extra protection with this hand cannon 38 special. So this is going to come into the finale of this story. Mary Jane has gotten herself a gun. And as we get here, we've come up with what's going on with her, the stalker, the one that's stalking her, Jonathan Caesar. He shows up to meet with the guy that is the director of the secret hospital soap opera that Mary Jane works on. Remember, he got hit in the head with the skylight, but he's actually survived it and is in the hospital right now with a busted head. And Jonathan Caesar comes in and winds up poisoning the man. Basically, first he gets him to make sure that he sends a message to Mary Jane to meet him somewhere private. So, and he makes sure that Jonathan Caesar gets rid of this guy, and he's going to go meet her in private. So he set this whole situation up where he can get Mary Jane by herself. Now we get to the action sequence. This is the part I've been waiting for and been dying for. Peter Parker sitting out there just waiting to see the launch, getting his science nerd on. But before things can happen, the Vulture and the Hobgoblin show up. And this is actually a pretty cool panel, the way this is situated. First you have the way that this is designed here. The background is actually kind of spread out somewhat, but Peter is in kind of like the same spot. So it's a little weird and a little bit of an artistic license taken here, okay? Because you can see the background clearly. It's supposed to be across these 3 panels here, but they've kind of modified it so you can still stick on Peter Parker's face in the foreground. The Vulture throwing some bombs, and the Hobgoblin throwing his pumpkin bombs out as they're both flying in. And that's when Peter decides to go run away with some of the other pedestrians and go make a quick change. And then the tank comes in that the Sinister Six stole. And we are off with the action. So as we're looking at this action sequence, I'll show you the original copy, which is actually starting to fall apart. That's how many times I read it back then, and up till now, it's actually starting to pull away from its staples. But we're going to take a look at it in the collector version as well. So this is actually a pretty cool panel right here, a top down of Electro and Sandman kind of going at the police. And you see Sandman kind of pushing the police away, so that way, you know, the other Sinister Six members don't actually kill any police, because Sandman's still trying to do this without hurting anybody for real. We'll take a look at it here, because I like this the colors on this one as well. You can see it a lot better here, a Sandman using his sand powers to push the police away. And everyone has their jobs, and Dr. Octopus has sent all his minions out to do his bidding and make sure they all handle their part of the plan. And Spider-Man just so happens to be there, and he shows up and realizes now that he's dealing with the Sinister Six. He realizes that, you know, Kraven's not there, but the Hobgoblin has replaced him, and now Spider-Man's going to deal with them all at once. Because before, when he fought them in the Amazing Spider-Man Annual, he fought them one at a time. Now he's going to have to fight them all together. And he decides to try to do some hit and run tactics and maybe use their powers against each other. So he starts off by bopping Electro in the face with a double drop kick. Very cool panel. The way he's hitting Electro, and Electro's actually kind of breaking out of the panel as he's getting hit. Now, this is something interesting here where Spider-Man is noticed by the Hobgoblin and also the Vulture. They're going to try to sneak attack him while he's fighting Electro. And they move him out of the way, and as they're doing that, fighting Spider-Man, the police are trying to wonder, like, what is going on? You know, where are these guys coming from? And this gigantic monster comes out of the smoke. So you and I know, as comic book fans, that this is the doing of Mysterio. Mysterio is the masters of illusion, and he created this giant monster. Now, I remember seeing this the first time as a kid, and I'm just like blown away by this monster. I love creatures and monsters of all kinds, so I was wondering, like, what in the heck is this? This looks like a weird mix of like a dragon, alien / goblin type creature all mixed together. But a very cool panel here, as you know, showcasing Mysterio using his powers. And as they're doing that, Dr. Octopus, he grabs a little portion here that he's going to hook up to the actual rocket. You know, the rocket is actually on a timed launch, so he wants to make sure that he gets his device on there quick, fast, and in a hurry. And Sandman is supposed to be Dr. Octopus's like bodyguard as this stuff is, you know, all this stuff is going on. All the rest of the Sinister Six is supposed to handle the guards and maybe Spider-Man, but he wants to keep Sandman close to him as kind of like a bodyguard as things are going through. So Spider-Man actually grabs the Goblin Glider and manages to slam the Hobgoblin's face into the ground. And then he tries to use the actual glider to hit the Vulture with. But unfortunately, Vulture moves out of the way. But it still works because he winds up hitting Electro straight in his face. And as Spider-Man decides to go for Dr. Octopus, he realizes Dr. Octopus is really the boss of all this. So as he's trying to go for Dr. Octopus, that's when he's attacked by Mysterio. And this is where we get number 4 of the Return of the Sinister Six splash pages. And this is probably my top one out of all of them. Okay. I've always enjoyed Mysterio as a villain. Like I said, but in one of my other reviews, I said that he kind of looks like he's like a wizard or something like that. And he just looks cool with the cape and like the bubble helmet. But this is a very cool splash page. And it also showcases that the mist that Mysterio uses with his illusions actually melts Spider-Man's web fluid. That's something that goes back to way back in Spider-Man's past when he first fought Mysterio, and they kept that here. And I like that. I like when they keep a hold of, you know, old gimmicks and old devices from the old comics. So Spider-Man, his web line starts melting, and you see Mysterio kind of standing over him in a very powerful light. This is a very well done panel of the kind of looking up at Mysterio. It puts him in a power position in this comic, and Spider-Man is almost kind of helpless here while he's fighting him. Let's look at it in the original copy. Let's see how well it kind of holds up. So this is the original version from 1990, and it still looks good. Still looks very good. And like I said, I didn't know about that they were doing special splash pages for each issue. I just knew I liked this. I just knew it looked really cool. And Spider-Man has a very good pose there, and Mysterio's kind of standing over him in a very powerful manner. So as we go here, we see that Spider-Man is about to land. You know, his webs are melted, but he's about to land into some soft sand, and that's when he realizes he's dealing with the Sandman. And I always thought this was a very cool panel as well, showcasing Sandman's powers, how he can reform himself from sand and make himself a little bit bigger. And he's kind of got Spider-Man, you know, locked in there. He's got his foot and his hand, and he's saying, you know, I don't want to actually have to hurt you, but Spider-Man kind of weaves his way around and punches the Sandman and gets himself out of there. So as Spider-Man frees himself from the Sandman, that's when Dr. Octopus yokes him up with the tentacles. And Dr. Octopus is saying that, you know, even though he has a master plan going on, he is kind of eager to kill Spider-Man as well. Like, this is kind of like a cherry on top, the fact that he gets to kill Spider-Man at the same time as getting this master plan done. But before he can, that's when Sandman attacks. And he actually knocks Dr. Octopus back with his sand. And that's when we get number 5 of the amazing splash pages in the Return of the Sinister Six. While I can honestly say that the Mysterio splash page is probably my favorite of the splash pages done in this Return of the Sinister Six, this is the one that I use the most when learning how to draw comic book style art. So just from drawing the extreme facial features here of the Sandman himself, like I remember copying this whole image. I wish I still had it, because I spent a lot of time working on this when I was a kid. I drew the whole thing. I, you know, colored him with markers and everything. So I spent a lot of time recreating this image here of the Sandman. But, you know, even trying to go like to emulate every little line here that showcased that his hand had turned into sand. But yeah, so this taught me a lot as far as like doing comic book art. Like just the foreshortening in his hand and having his hand kind of come directly at you. I learned that from here. How to do like feet and shoes in comic books, I learned that from here. How to draw like a body kind of somewhat coming forward at the viewer, I learned that from this comic book as well. And we can see it here in the collected version. You can see the colors pop a lot better as well. But yeah, I learned a lot from this image. So this is probably one of my favorite images, and this is what probably the image that made me a fan of Erik Larsen and his illustration style. And I used this a lot as a child, going back and forth as far as like learning how to draw action sequences in comics. So love this panel and love this splash page, and a little bit different from what you would expect with this story, because now you have a member of the Sinister Six and Spider-Man, but they're not fighting against each other. They're on the same side now, because Sandman he draws the line at killing people. He didn't want to come here to kill anybody, even Spider-Man, and now he's turned against his actual comrades in the Sinister Six. And remember when I told you Dr. Octopus said he's got something special for the Sandman? Well, here's where he pulls out his special. He's got a special gun made for when given an idea by the last time the Sandman fought the Hulk. And he blasts him. It's like a high energy heat type ray, and it turns the Sandman into glass. So now the Sandman is not even sand anymore. He's frozen in like a glass shape. And he told the Sinister Six to just go ahead and break him into pieces. But before they can, Spider-Man comes in for the save. And while Spider-Man is fighting the Sinister Six outside, Dr. Octopus has gone in and told the scientists in there that they need to go ahead and launch this ship. Don't hold back. You know, just because there's a ruckus going on outside, I need you to launch it so I can get my poison into the atmosphere. And just to show these scientists that he's not playing around, he yokes one up by the neck and kills him instantly. So, a great way of showcasing how ruthless the villain is without necessarily breaking the comics code. You know, he's killing him off screen, but you get the idea. You know what's going on by the sound effect and, you know, the look of this guy's hand, that he's lost control of his faculties, now that his neck is snapped. And all the scientists here, some of them are crying, some of them feel horrible, they're scared, but they go ahead with the launch anyway. And we see Spider-Man, his spider sensors are going off because he knows that this rocket is going to launch and all that heat and fire is going to come from under the rocket ship, so he wants to move out of the way. And right as he does so, you know, Spider-Man doesn't know exactly what's going on or what Dr. Octopus has launched into the atmosphere. He said he heard something about poison. I hope it wasn't on that ship. But before he can even think about what to do about it, he gets sprayed with the same poison that Hobgoblin stole earlier. So you remember when Hobgoblin put that stuff in his pouch, he took it and sprayed Spider-Man with it. And now we got our hero gasping for air and gasping for his life as the Hobgoblin stands over him. And this got me. So I was one of those young people reading this comic book who was like, oh my God, I have to find out what happens next, because I thought Spider-Man was dead for sure. The fact that we've all heard over and over again that this was going to be some deadly poison launched into the atmosphere, and now Spider-Man's been sprayed with the raw stuff right then and there, and you know the bad guys are not going to give him the antidote. So I was definitely looking forward to the conclusion of this story. So, you know, that's the end of this issue, and we're going to definitely get to the conclusion of the return of the Sinister Six. Looking forward to getting to this issue. A lot of stories get cleaned up in this one, but this was the big one. This was the big battle that we had all kind of been building up towards, as far as seeing Spider-Man face down these enemies. You know, we got to see them get together one by one. We got to see them give Spider-Man the slip in the last issue, where he didn't know that he was fighting the Sinister Six. He thought he was just fighting these villains, you know, one-on-one, but they all gave him the slip. And then he has to fight them all together, and he comes to the horrible realization that these are his old enemies teamed up once again to cause chaos. So, very cool issue. I loved a lot of the action sequences here. The splash pages were amazing. I love both these splash pages. These were the ones that helped me a lot as far as being an artist and drawing action sequences of heroes and villains fighting. Great shot of the Sinister Six here, even though it's a very small panel. Eric Larsen's still able to fit all the characters in here, and it still looks great. You know, it still looks really good seeing all these characters together in the same spot. And once again, you can take a look at some of the kicks and the hits that Spider-Man gives these characters as time goes on. You know, as they're fighting, he has to deal with them all at once, and he's trying his best to sort of, you know, just like I said, use hit and run tactics, maybe use some of their powers against them. Like he grabs the Goblin Glider and uses that to hit Electro in the face. So he's trying his best to fight all these guys at once, but this is a lot. You know, sometimes these characters themselves give Spider-Man a lot of trouble when they're by themselves, so having to fight them all at once gives him even more trouble. But very well done issue. I really enjoyed this one a lot. I've always enjoyed this one, and this is a classic from my childhood, and I hope that you all enjoyed this review of Part 5 of the Return of the Sinister Six. And we will be back in the next video where we actually talk about the finale of the Return of the Sinister Six. If you want to see that, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to this channel so that way you'll know when I am here doing these comic book reviews. Make sure you, make sure you go ahead and like this video so that way it picks up in the algorithm and other comic book fans are able to find it. Those of you who remember this book particularly, or those who are just new to comics and want to know about these classic comic books from back in the day. Also, make sure you go ahead and share it with anyone that you know is a classic comic book fan. I very much like to have them here for the next review. Anyway, folks, this is Chris Crazy House, and I will see you next time on Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy. Peace.